What happens when you purify your body, your mind, your spirit? Something miraculous. The body begins to heal itself. Welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast, where each week we explore new ways to heal your body from the root, igniting your inner healer. You are a medicine. And now, here's your host, Robin Stebbins.
Hello, and welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast. It is me, your host, Robin Stebbins, and today I'm here with Paula Conroy, who is all the way, in Australia, Byron Beach, or Byron Bay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should all look that place up. That sounds gorgeous. Paula's bio is so impressive, and I have so much respect for you, leaving the climate that you did and now embracing who you truly are. You work primarily with women, and I think globally, we as women, especially as we're waking up, have so many traumas and wounding, especially around having children and not knowing what, if I knew then, my son's 16, what I know now, I would have completely different. And there's a lot of pain in that. There's a lot of shame. And I hear that over and over and over with other women, other mothers. So can you speak to that fragmented part of us that needs healing? Where do you even begin?
I know it's thank you. It's so beautiful to meet with you today and to discuss these really important topics, which in my experience and my reflections of all the extraordinary women that are around me that have got so much to offer, that hold so much, that do so much in their families and their communities and their workplaces. And yet there's still this aspect of ourselves that is riddled in self-doubt and in self-worth issues and in self-flagellation and in self-judgment. And it's just this really devastating toxic spiral that women are in, with seemingly no way to interrupt that cycle, no way to kind of bring a conscious shock or some kind of, force that can interrupt them and go like, whoa, stop. Can you see yourself? Can you feel yourself? If I speak to women that are in those spirals, which many are, and I ask them that question, is there any way to stop? They say, I just don't know how. And while I've done this work for many years, I've looked into so many different modalities. And what I recognized when I came across traditional rites of passage processes is that, in our Western culture especially, we are severely lacking in this wisdom that is in the creation of conscious, healthy rites of passage for people to transition from one stage of life to the next. And that's really what a rite of passage is. It's like a passage that we need to pass through, that we get the right to pass through. And yet what happens when we don't consciously approach those with a degree of support from community, as well as with a degree of education or understanding or awareness or cultural nuances and norms, we just land up transitioning from one stage of life to the next without actually doing those transitions well. And I think we can all sort of look around at our youth today and see children transitioning into young adults. And what's happening in that adolescent phase, we have a severe mental health drop-off by the time a child's 14. And we've got this pandemic of social media that we haven't necessarily been able to work with in a really conscious way, that's just kind of taken over. And now we're in sort of a free fall collectively as a human family. And so I feel that, and what I've observed as well with the work that I do also with children when we work on camps to support parent and child to go through these transitions, is that without creating almost like a birth canal for that transition, it's like the child is transitioning into another form, and it's metamorphosing, she or he is metamorphosing from a child into a young adult, much like we transition from being a fetus in the womb through a birth canal to come out into this human form. These transitions are happening all the time, and they require us to build a structure around that transition in a really healthy way so that the children can go through that compression, which is a necessary process of pulling oneself into oneself and being able to contract with that experience that is inevitable without those boundaries. And we know with parenting these days that without those healthy boundaries, children are kind of like lost in the dark. They don't know where the wall is. It's almost like putting a blindfold on them and saying, right, can you find the closest wall? And they're like, stumbling around in the dark without really knowing. Even if they'd walked into the room in the first instance, put the blindfold on, inevitably they're going to be tentative and unsure and uncertain while they sort of feel their way towards the closest wall while they have that blindfold on. This creation of a passage, this creation of the healthy rite of passage, the boundaries that children need to, and adults as well, but we'll sort of go back to the root, the beginning, where it sort of all starts unraveling, is that without that really healthy passage that's been consciously created, that has community around the individual while they're doing that transition, nobody can do that transition for that individual. That individual has to walk that path alone. However, there is a possibility in the frequency of the field when the child that's transitioning into the young adult can go through that passage, understand that compression, come out the other side and be welcomed back into the community with joy and with celebration and with the awareness of the whole community knowing that something transitioned for that individual, because not only did they have the structure and the process, they also had the knowing and the awareness that they were going to be welcomed back and returned back, the return ceremony back into their community, and the community was going to hold them and support them to integrate this big transition. That would have happened anyway. And if we don't do that, they'll go out and create their own rites of passage. They'll surf on top of cars, they'll take lots of drugs, they'll have unprotected sex, etc., etc. There's all these unhealthy behaviors that would happen as a result of that child knowing that they needed to transition, but not knowing how to do that well. And I've noticed, especially also from my own exploration of that those key moments in our youth, when not done well, have long-lasting effects that actually takes an enormous amount of work as we get, especially into our midlife, trying to unwind what happened then and trying to heal from the traumas that occurred from those younger years of our life. So I feel that it starts really back then.
That's a lot that you said, and so much of it, I think, we were given these Trojan horses in the form of cell phones, and it seems so great technology. I can take my whole office with me in this little tiny phone, but what I think was behind that is that they are now raising our children. They meaning corporations, nefarious forces, pedophiles. They have gotten access to your children for hours and hours and hours a day. And, we have created this society based on compounded trauma. None of us were given a blueprint. And, most of us are spending half our lives getting over our own trauma and trying to get these kids on some kind of path that resembles what you're talking about. So I know parents, especially in California right now, probably all worldwide, are really feeling the stress, especially since these 2020 lockdowns and all of this other compounded problems, and more to do and more to worry about and more to navigate. Where do you even begin? Because my son is 16. I did a rite of passage with him, a formal ceremony when he was 14, and it was beautiful. It was a connecting, bonding thing between us. And I've always had that connection with him, but he's also, 16 and has a phone. Yeah. And it's such a real problem. You're speaking to the hearts of myself as a mother as well, and many other parents out there, is that it's almost as though this behemoth, was
unconsciously just came into our field. And at first it was this wonderful, exciting thing to be connected in the way, it brought cohesion, the connectivity that technology brought. And it was like, wow, we can be connected to everybody in the world. I'm recognizing my oneness with everybody, not just my little community or my town or my lifestyle. I can have access to all these people around the world. Look at this diversity, So it came with that initial positive expansion of our human experience while we reached out into parts of the world and people that we would never have been able to connect with. And yet, unfortunately, with the nature of our human unconsciousness, with not being aware and not consciously navigating our way through that, because we got a bit overexcited and we just let it happen, and then devices got put into children's hands when they were 2 years old, and ding, 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 suddenly the momentum behind that emergence of technology was so great that now we're kind of trying to backpedal, but there's all this forward momentum on it that, momentum, as we know, trying to turn a ship, it takes time for that momentum to come down. And now where I witness and experience so many parents waking up, it's like, wow, I don't want to have my child on devices all the time. I don't want to have them in front of TV, but there's so much momentum behind it that now trying to wake up to that momentum and to try and turn the ship at this stage when the child is now indoctrinated into it and the culture around the child or the young adult is so visceral and so alive for them, to try and unwind that is so unbelievably difficult. So it's a really challenging discussion that I have with so many of the parents, especially the mothers that I work with when we do the mother-son camp, which we do from 10 to 14. And then we do the full Rite of Passage camp from 14 to 17, which sounds like you had a beautiful experience with your son doing, which is amazing. This is the real, how do we make these micro changes to the way in which we're relating to our children? And how do we make the micro changes on a personal level? Like, I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that we cannot change the child. We have to change what's happening within ourselves. We have to work on our own traumas, our own attachments, our own fears, our own overwhelm. It's like, oh, fine, just take the device, or oh, it's fine, just whatever. It's that overwhelm that happens within the adult and invariably gets felt by the child. So for us now as adults in this world, and especially for us in our midlife where we are, we've been around, we've done quite a few jobs, we've traveled potentially, we've had children potentially, we've got a few sort of stripes on our list of experiences, and experiences are obviously where we learn the most from. We can study in a book for sure, but it's in the experience of things that expansion occurs. So we sort of had all these experiences that we haven't necessarily fully personally digested, leading back to our own childhood, leading back to the lineage that we came from. You've mentioned that earlier, this, the passing down from the generation to the generation, and then we continue to perpetuate that unless we have the capacity to wake up to our own responsibility and also our own capacity, our own ability to make a change. As difficult as it might feel in that first instance, when we know we want to make a change, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this momentum that's weighing. I'm trying so hard not to do it. But then it's a process of resilience and building our resilience as adults. We need to heal these parts of ourselves that are standing in the way of us making the conscious and healthy changes that we need to on a personal level. And in turn, then holding that integral space from our own frequency for those, especially our children. And then as we grow in our awareness of our impact that we have on a frequency level, because it's deeply rooted within ourselves, we can extend out that frequency and that impact and that service to beyond. But it's got to start with ourselves. We've got to start with this process first. What's going on for me? What am I riddled with? What fear have I got? What wounding have I got? Why am I unable to turn the tide of this momentum that's weighing on my shoulders, or make the changes within my household without it being, all right, this is what's got to happen, or no more phones from this time to this time. And, that sort of protective firefighter comes out in us. And ultimately, that's just because we're overwhelmed, So it's really about, as an adult, as a parent, being able to recognize how do we pull back that process within ourselves to connect to ourselves in a much more intimate way, so that we can turn that tide around to be able to make conscious, clear, very strong and powerful, but not dramatic choices that turn the tide of the way in which we relate, first to ourselves, then to our use of our technology, then the relationship we have with our child, and then to be able to teach from that place because it's deeply embodied within ourselves.
Yeah, I so resonate with that. And it is, you can't fight the phones. You can't grab the phone away and say no more screen time or screen time from here. You know, they have access everywhere at school. And so what I found is I go in, if I see my son on his phone, and I cuddle with him, or I say, hey, what are you looking at? And, you know, it's usually something that he's interested in, like bodybuilding, and then we can have a conversation around it. I can see what videos he's watching, and then we are now connecting. And I think he has found that to be beneficial, because then he'll come and find me out and seek me out and have conversations with me. Or if he's been with his friends for too many hours in a row, he'll come and get some mom time. But like you said, you have to know yourself. You have to know your trauma. You have to know your wounding. You have to not be scrolling on your phone and checking out. And if you are, not to shame yourself, but to say, why am I needing to check out? What am I not wanting to look at within myself? And then you can lead more by example from this space of like love and compassion, like true love, meaning I'm not judging you and I don't love you because you're, you know, checking these tick marks on a list of right behaviors. But then you get to express this sort of healing capacity of unconditional love, because then you have that unconditional love embodied within yourself. But again, that's where we kind of, you know, now have to get into the self work. And as women, you know, especially mothers, I just see us riddled with guilt, and that's a way. I don't know, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. It just shuts everything down.
Totally. There's this real sense of overwhelm amongst the mothers. You know, our culture has been changing for so long now in terms of, you know, greater levels of equality and women being able to work at the same level. Well, not yet, but in jobs that, you know, previously weren't accessible to women. You know, the home structures and flows are changing, with men doing more around the home than they were previously. And this whole rebalance has been taking place to a certain degree. But really what I've noticed and what I've experienced has been there's still this cultural traditional aspect and consciousness at this level with the masculine or the men in our lives or the partners in our lives, whichever's happening for us, around the roles and responsibilities. Like, we haven't yet embodied that shift of like, wow, there's this equal weighting at home. So what I've noticed is women are like still carrying the can at home, doing, you know, the lunch boxes and making sure the dinner's on the table, and all these traditional roles of being a parent in a family or a mother in a family. And then they're also running really extraordinary jobs. And then there's this sort of overlay of all of that, of some kind of like, oh, how does she do it all? This sort of superwoman mystic. And there's this cultural pressure then, or this internalized cultural pressure that we think is there. And it's just like all of this has just been layered onto us without us being able to first delayer. Not this. I'm not attuned to this yet, you know? Yeah. So, yeah.
There's just one thing I want to dig in a little bit that I have been feeling more and more into. And I haven't worked it out, so this is just off the cuff. But I'm looking at traditional women's roles, and I was programmed in the 60s and 70s to believe that we were repressed, and that we were sold, you know, get into the workforce. But then I have this internal desire to take care of my son, to take care of my man. I love cooking for them. I love making bread and all, you know, all of these traditional feminine things that I believe are coming from within. But then there's this ongoing battle within me, because I want to be able to do it all. But at some point we hit the wall, and then it's not fun anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fully with you on that, because I also have this deep innate sense of nurturance within me towards my children, and, the desire to hold a beautiful, loving, caring, safe space at home, and to nurture my family in that way, and to be connected to that part of me that is that, healthy, beautiful, feminine side of me. And for me, having spent 15 years in leadership in corporate banking, sorry, my microphone was just changing there. For me, having spent 15 years in corporate banking, and having grown up in that world, at that stage of my life, the relative degree of consciousness that I had as a younger individual, I grew up in that world with eyes that were still slightly marred, and possibly, and actually I'd say I did, adopt a whole lot of ways of being that were contrary to my innate soft feminine nature, which is, typical of that archetype, that maiden archetype, where she's coming up from adolescence into exploring and finding out who she is and what she wants to do, and pushing up and out and trying on this hat and that hairstyle and this job and so on and so forth, while we're taking things off and putting them on, working out who we are. So in that process, I was working out who I was. And in that process, in that environment, highly patriarchal structure, highly masculine environment, I wanted to be like the men, or I wanted to be liked by the men. And that was, noticing around me that the men get rewarded, and they actually are the ones that are going to give me the next opportunity. And so that was still sort of locked in my consciousness at that time as a maiden seeking up and out, and how to do that. So to untangle myself from all of that, when I started becoming deeply aware of this innate feminine part of me, this feminine consciousness that lives inside of me that I didn't know. I didn't know this part of me. People would say, "Oh, you're a up and coming female leader in the business," and I'd be like, yeah, is that just because I'm a woman? Like, what does that actually mean? I don't really understand what that means. And if I don't understand, I can be rest assured none of the men understand the reasons why it's good to have a woman. They'll say it's diversity, but why? It's a balancing aspect within the conversation or around the table. But why? What is it that women bring to that forefront? And in that exploration of asking myself that question, what is it about being a female leader that makes it so important to have diversity around the table, that makes it so important for women to rise up in the workplace to balance this out? And for me to discover that for myself, it took me actually exiting that whole environment and going through a very big dissolve for a good 2 years of untangling myself from this identity that I had acquired and been co-creative with unconsciously, not recognizing my own part in that process. Like you said, that repressed feminine from the 60s and the 70s, yes, it was repressed, but we also had a part to play in that. And, so there's this real sense of like, we can't be pointing fingers at one another going, you did this and I did that. We have co-created our situation. It's no one person's fault. Now the invitation is, how do we call people to action, to unwind what we've created so that we can create in a state of unity and in a state of cohesion between masculine and feminine. And that starts within ourselves. So I first had to become aware, which was quite shocking, to be honest, and actually quite filled with a lot of emotion for me, like quite devastated. Oh my gosh, look at how I contributed to this. And then the rage at what I saw happen to me from the outside, like, wow, they did that to me. Oh, but look at me. And oh, they did that. And oh, but I did this. And that kind of internal misalignment caused me a lot of suffering. And in that process, it was like, oh, wow, how is it that I can heal these parts of me that are wounded in this dynamic that I've experienced, in order for me to be able to discover for myself what this true essence that is in me, like what is this true essence, this feminine experience that's coming through me, and how then do I live from that place? And that's really where Rites of Passage came. It was a rite of passage out of one stage of life into a full dissolution, like the caterpillar dissolves into nothing before it reemerges as a butterfly. But there's a painful process of dissolving. And, I was quite attached to the big fancy title and to the paycheck and to the seemingly important job. Like, I recognize now a lot of codependence from me on like, wow, I need my team in order for me to feel important. I need people to need me in order for me to feel some sense of self-worth. And, all of that unpicking is a painful process. It was a painful process for me. But once I was able to become aware of these parts that were in conflict within myself and recognize that I no longer needed to blame the job or blame the patriarchy or blame the men or blame the system, blame the culture, all of that external projection is just merely a bypass of the work that needs to be done. And sometimes that bypass is necessary because there's a tenderness inside of ourselves that's not yet ready to be addressed. It's like peeling an onion. We sort of bypassing that process. And if we can notice that we're bypassing and blaming another and blaming the system, blaming the culture, it's like, oh wow, there's something I'm not able to be within myself yet. I don't yet have the capacity to hold how I feel. And so a big journey of the feminine is around how do I feel? How do I create safety for myself in order for me to be able to feel these big, difficult feelings that I have not been able to feel so far? And I think, looping back to what you're saying about that, that cohesion between the two sides of ourselves, that dissolution of the unhealthy masculine, which was acquired from me, to discover this innate healthy feminine, which includes all of those beautiful nurturing qualities of the light feminine, requires us to go through the dark feminine within us, that part of ourselves that when we were young, we were taught to be pretty pleasing and polite and be a good girl and, all those programs were done to us, bows in the hair and make sure you keep your clothes clean. And all of that conditioning was happening to us the whole way through. We have not necessarily been held in our lives to be able to be furious or rageful or vengeful or any of those emotions, which are part of this emotional range that we are here to experience as human beings. Our culture has like an aversion to that, and especially in women, it's like, oh, she's being way too emotional. Well, actually, no, it's just emotions are living through the feminine body within all of us, men included. The downside of that process for men has been that, unfortunately, men have not been supported to feel. So we have so many men that are suffering from mental health problems, so many men that in Australia, like the number of men to women who take their life every day, it's like, I think the last stat I looked at was like 8 men to 1 woman. This trapped emotional body that hasn't been supported to feel because they've got to be a man's man and they've got to buck up and not cry and boys don't cry and all of these disastrous implications of our society and our culture not allowing for this feminine consciousness journey that happens in both men and women to happen in a safe and healthy way. And as you so beautifully articulated earlier that you have a practice with your son is, can I get to a point where I can hold the space that no matter what is going on for the other person, no matter how revolting, rageful, or whatever judgment we might have previously had about what they're saying or what they're doing, even if they're throwing it at us, can I hold that space for them to have their emotional experience to the entirety that they need to, because invariably emotions are just energy and motion. It will wane when we allow for that experience to move through ourselves. It's like, and that really for me is where this rub is that there is this rite of passage into this dark feminine, which lives in both men and women, for us to be able to emerge back out into whichever side we're on, healthy masculine, healthy feminine, and then be able to connect to, wow, I want to show up as a nurturing mother in my family. I want to make different choices. These are roles I choose to do these roles, not because culture's told me to do them, but because this is coming from within me. There may be many women out there who are like, I don't want to run the household. I've got a friend who lives in Brisbane and she's like, nope, husband does all the chores around the home and I do the work. And it works beautifully for their family, So it's like, how do we then allow for that difficult, contracted rite of passage journey into that dark part of ourselves, that dark feminine, having the support structure of community or of counselors, or lots of people might not have access to counselors, but building community structures and relationships where we can be held in that darkness, in that winter time of our lives, to be able to emerge back out and connect to the self-source and connect to that part of ourselves where we have choice. And once we choose, it's a completely different dynamic,
I think that's the crux of it, because, as you're talking, I like to get things very simple, because it's easy to get overwhelmed as you're awakening, as you're looking at all the different trauma, like, oh, I have to deal with all this and clean this up. If you condense it down to knowing yourself deeply and knowing that we have all been programmed, Disney movies and teachers and parents, and that is because they were programmed. And there's also, we're great consumers as women if we're programmed. You spend a lot of money on clothes and beauty products if you're in that mindset. But again, it's, what do I love to do? I was so programmed growing up on a ranch to not want to do anything that I would see as a repressed female, the repressed feminine, staying at home and keeping the house beautiful and decorating. I love to do that, though. And when you start to tap into that inner glow within you, what is it that lights me up? Then you can keep it more simplified as you're awakening. And then you can come with that, like you said so brilliantly, holding that space, that loving kindness, so that no matter what they're throwing at you, you don't take that victim role. Like, how dare you say that to me? Who do you think you are? And then we're just back combative. We're fighting. We haven't opened up or bloomed that potential connection between each and every one of us. So whether it's the alpha male and the alpha female, it doesn't matter. The labels don't really matter. It's like, I just want to get to know you heart to heart. I'm going to come in as authentically as I can, as vulnerably as I can, being aware of my surroundings. But I think that's the true warrior. The true warrior doesn't come in with guns ablazing. It's, showing your heart to people, connecting with people, even the ones that you bristle against. And that's, when we're talking about rites of passage, we both have similar experiences. I'm a hospice nurse. I've been working hospice for quite a while, and I help people transition to that final stage. And mostly, it's the family being able to let them go in that final release. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that you had experience as a death walker. So I'm very curious how all of this information, all of this release of, your former banking world and the corporate world, and assigning meaning to how much you make and how much your team approves of you, to now just being open-hearted and working with people who are in their final transition.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And, I have such reverence and respect for, yourself and all the beautiful people out there who can sit in the intimacy of the profundity of that final transition. There's something quite profound and exquisite, as deeply fraught as it might be in the moment, whether it's a expected death or whether it's a unexpected death. There's something so mystical about that moment, or those moments leading up to that transition. And ultimately, our culture, certainly for all of us in the West, or majority of us in the West, we haven't really been taught how to die. It's so taboo in our culture to even talk about, like, oh gosh, don't talk about that. That's, morbid talk. And
yes.
It's like, actually the only thing that we know is going to happen in our lives, like, sure, we think the sun's going to rise every day, but that also might not happen. We could get hit by a meteorite, anything could happen. So the only thing we do know is that this life is transient. And yet this kind of, all these anxieties and fears and worries are kind of the branches of the ultimate tree of contraction, when all of that stems down to this trunk, which is the trunk of fear of death. And that, the literal death, body death, leaving this plane and what's next, and all the anxiety that happens around that. And also then the death of parts of ourselves that have either been a winning formula wow, but that served me so long, but now it's not serving me anymore, and I need that part to die, but I don't know what's coming to replace that. There's this passageway in between something needing to die and that winter time needing to happen in order for something new to birth in spring. That's not something that we get taught how to hold. If we look at nature has to go through winter in order to create the right conditions for crops to grow in the spring. It has to have that rest and digest. Yet in our culture, all of us humans being a part of nature, we don't allow for that winter time to come. We're like, oh my gosh, something needs to change. I can feel the leaves of the summertime falling and I'm going into autumn. Let me quickly create something new and jump to spring. We don't let it fully compost, So with the death walking, it's and being able to, death walking is, end of life midwifery or end of life care or end of life doula work. And I love the word death walking because it's to support people to continue to walk through the stages of death in a really healthy way and to not allow, which our culture has done, for the death to happen at the beginning of the winter and everybody to kind of skim across winter and quickly get busy again with something to do with spring. Just keep yourself busy and then you'll be fine. It's like, no, create intentional space for you to really walk into the darkness of the fear that you have of death, of this personal loss that you have of your beloved or somebody that's passed on, somebody who's died. And it's like to support people to continue to walk through those stages of death in a healthy way. For funerals, it's just ceremonies, ceremonies being a really big part of rites of passage. So often it's like, oh, well, just make sure you don't get the congregation crying too much, just skim down just a little bit before, it's like, absolutely not. Like if we help people and support people in that kind of community structure, the ceremony of a funeral or a memorial service is just that. It's there to hold the space to go into the very difficult feelings that we are experiencing as we are in that discombobulation after we've lost somebody, in that very liminal space that we're in when we've lost somebody that we love, that we deeply care about. And so the death walking process, so I can hold this the ceremony myself, and it's like, actually we want to take the congregation to the possibility of them connecting to that very difficult part of their feeling being. And once they've felt that part of themselves and they've touched that level of grief, it's like inevitably the cycle will come up again. But there's a release and a freedom because we've allowed ourselves to go there and we've been held in the community of our beloveds in that ceremony to be able to go there. If you look at some of the traditional cultures around the world, their ceremonies are wailing and howling and thrashing around on the ground and letting all of that energy and motion, all of that emotion fly through their bodies to release it so it doesn't get stuck and trapped inside of our being. When we get stuck and trapped in that process of walking through these stages, that's when the next disease comes. We will have something that will invariably land up coming out in an unhealthy way again.
That is so important to mention that, because that is, when we're out of alignment with our true self. And like you said, here in the Western cultures, we are not taught how to properly express our emotions. They're always controlled, not too happy, not too sad, not too angry. You get rewarded for being really even keeled or mellow or chill, as they say. But the emotions are what are connecting you directly to your soul to know, what do I truly love? What do I truly want to do? Instead of getting stuck, in these patterns of programming. It's like, well, I'm going to be a corporate woman because this is what you do. And I've been taught that's how success is. But when we get back to really feeling those emotions of grief, especially at loss, when I go here around, I do home health hospice. So I'm in the home as the person's dying with the family. They don't know what to do. They're all afraid. They want to feed them. They want to, get them back to health instead of releasing them, allowing them to transition.
Yeah, totally. I'm so with you on that. There's this clinging to it because we kind of leave our acceptance of death and our digestion of death to the last minute. It's like, oh, geez, I'm going to die. And it's like this whole life, it's been unconscious. And we've heard so many near-death experiences of people's spontaneous awakenings at that point of view, like, oh my gosh, here it is.
Yeah.
So working back from that ultimate rite of passage, the ultimate greatest adventure, really, if we can learn how to reframe this transition from this 3D plane of reality into the next reality, or whatever that might be, level of consciousness, whatever that might be, if we can learn how to reframe that culturally and this to become normalized, a conversation around death and the intimacy that comes with it and the feelings associated with it, we can start to see how this is actually, life is presenting us with so many opportunities to turn towards this exploration. When I left corporate banking, there was a death there. I died to that person that was there. When children transition into young adulthood, there's a death of the childlike innocence and the childlike body. The body starts changing. When somebody gets married in that rite of passage, there's a death to the maiden years or to the bachelor years and an arrival in the unity. And there's all sorts of good things, but there's also parts of us that will deeply mourn that. I remember when my first son was born, 3 months into him being born, and obviously it was also, well, not obviously, but for me, my experience was very exciting and very wonderful. I'm so excited to have this beautiful boy. He's 9.5 now. And 3 months in, when my husband had spent 2 weeks with me in the afterbirth, and then he had gone back to work, and he's off, drinking his coffees at work and having a catch up here and joining the guys for a beer after work and going to play tennis and doing all the things. And 3 months in, I realized, like, oh my gosh, this baby is with me all the time. There's this death of who I was before, and the reality of that is only seeping in now, that the experience of being with this child all the time is happening for me. And I realize, oh my gosh, I haven't mourned the death of my maiden years, the death of my freedom. So all of these experiences that are happening, changing a job, we can think of countless numbers of opportunities that are presenting to us all the way through our normal life, of this call for us to digest this experience of death. And this is happening in a way that we're still here, and we can do it consciously if we choose to, but because we're scared of that trunk at the end, that fear of death, and then all those anxieties come into, oh, I'm anxious about having a baby, I'm anxious about changing job, I'm feeling really depressed because I lost this beloved that, that I loved so much, or I lost a whatever. We get stuck in those emotions because we're then in the in the branches of the experience, as opposed to like, wow, what am I being called to? I'm being called here to really ask that question, who am I? And at the real core of that question, if we get away from things like, well, I'm primordial consciousness and I'm oneness, I'm non-dual awareness in my most sort of pure essence, coming into this human experience that we're in, it's like, wow, I am a transient being in this 3D reality, and I am going to die. That is something that I categorically know. Can I be with that without it contracting me into an experience that is terrifying, that then I push into the shadow, and as a result of that ultimate fear of death, that ultimate rite of passage, being pushed deeply into the shadow, it's popping up now in unhealthy ways with anxieties and fears and all these other things about the things that are changing in our lives. So there's an invitation that life is giving to us all the time to become more familiar and more comfortable, and to practice the capacity building that life is giving us in relation to the things that are dying all the time. We're building that capacity through that to become deeply rested in our well of knowing that, hey, one day I'm going to die. And that's actually okay. I feel fear, or I can experience fear in relation to that. I can experience the unknown, but really where I am here in my knowingness is that I know I'm going to die. And there's a capacity to create the calm. Then, in the situations when we are losing beloved, we will cry the tears, we will feel the feels, but it doesn't have the potential to consume us and to create that kind of separation from the self that knows, that part of ourselves that know.
And you can also then be fully present with the grief of each experience. And I think, you said it so eloquently when we're talking about nature. I think a lot of us would just love to just stay in spring and summer and a little bit of fall, but that's not our essence. Our essence is we are not one with nature. We are nature. You know, it is us. The apple trees, the earth peoples, we are walking, breathing entities of nature. And in that, we look at beautiful nature as our blueprint to living. Nature has a season for everything. The tree blossoms and the leaves fall off and they die and they decay on the ground. All necessary parts to create the blossom. Or that beautiful butterfly that you see going around to flowers had to melt down from a caterpillar into a chrysalis in a horrible gunky state, you know, in imaginal cells to become that. So I think when I look at all of this wonderful information that we've talked about, it's more condense it to be when you're present in the moment. Yes, we know we're going to die. Yes, we can embrace the full experience of life. But in this moment, you get to find that bliss, that creation of heaven on earth or hell on earth. I mean, you can sit in the same chair and create one or the other, but fully embraced into this experience, then it becomes a choice. When you're not programmed to be this person, or what you were saying before, when you are in that program state, then you're now reacting to it's fear of death, instead of embracing your experience of that transition.
Yeah, fully. And, it's Rudolf Steiner, described these sorts of things as, every moment is a inflow and an outflow with our breath. Every day goes into night, every season goes into season. And, as human beings forget that, as you so beautifully put, that we are a part of nature, and yet we are so much a part of nature. Like the wave is not separate from the ocean. The wave, although it's a wave, it is very much a part of that ocean. And so for us to find a way to apprentice to nature, apprentice to the different seasons, and really be able to recognize the mirror that nature is for us in each of those different seasons. And, as you quite rightly put, we hero worship summertime. Everything's got to be wonderful all the time. It's got to be this. And then if it's in a winter, it's like, oh, shame, Paula's not doing so well. She's, really low. It's like, well, actually, it's a necessary winter. That compost, if the leaves don't fully fall from the trees, the compost doesn't get created. The trees don't have the possibility of fuller bloom in their next cycle, and so it's very much that mirror has that capacity to teach us, if we can remember ourselves as a part of nature and to drop into kind of the cycles. We might be in a winter time in our career, but a summertime in a relationship. We might literally be in autumn, but we might be in a spring in the birthing of a child or something new in our lives. So when we start to recognize all these different facets that we can gain wisdom from, we have the opportunity to then say, oh, wow, look at all of these different stages of the cycle of life that I'm in. The cycle, which is a very feminine principle, the cycles of nature. Mother Nature works in a cycle. Feminine bodies work in a cycle. There's very much the cyclical nature, which is very different to the masculine nature in us, which is start here and then do this to get there. It's linear, and both have equally as important roles in our human existence. And yet we don't necessarily discern between the two. We don't tap into, when do I need to pull out that masculine nature, and when can I drop into this cyclic nature of the feminine cycle. And so, all of these that we're discussing, and I love how you want to simplify it all the time for it to be accessible to people. Like, how do we get super present in the moment? How do we build that capacity to just fully be here, not in the 100,000 lists in our head or in our trauma? All of these stories that we're talking about, all of these modalities that one can explore and apprentice to or study, gives us the opportunity to recognize all the ways in which we are holding ourselves back from that potential to be fully in this moment. And Rumi, the beautiful Sufi poet, said, our task in life is not to seek for love, but it's to seek to find the barriers that are within us that prevent us from love. When we are fully free, our we are fully attuned to the cycles of nature and the currency of life, but we've got all these veils and experiences that have happened that we need to be able to unpeel one by one so that we can be but that part of ourselves that is that primordial consciousness, that oneness experience of being fully present in the moment can be available to us. But we do need to go through a journey, a rite of passage to become aware of the layers, and then go through a journey of dismantling those one by one in a really healthy way so that we can live in that primordial consciousness. And then when we're there, we have the opportunity to act from that place, which is beautiful and pure and wholesome and attuned to everything around us, which is the miracle of life.
And I think that is absolutely why we do this work and why I'm doing this podcast, is that when I don't think any one of us on this planet right now is living in our potential based on the global things that are happening and have been happening and corporate control. But in that, it has pushed a lot of us to ask that, like, hey, what is my potential if I'm not poisoned by the air and the water and my food and have to worry about herbicides and pesticides and emotional toxins, and what's my potential? And I find that, Paula, and I don't know if you'll agree, that once I start untangling one or two of these old traumas and releasing it, it creates this momentum within my spirit that it's easier to then release more and more and more. So then you start to feel that essence, and then you start to tap into what is my potential as a human being. Like, I think we're all clairvoyant. I think we're all have this extra sensory perception that we're not even aware of. Because then, of course, then you're not a great consumer and you're not living in fear. And so you're not easily brainwashed or, swayed in your decision making.
I'm fully on board with that. And, some people might find, us using words like clairvoyance and stuff quite, I can just hear my husband going like, oh, here we go, So, a beautiful second word that I use is the intuition, like this intuition that's in us human beings, and men and women alike. We all have had experiences where we've walked into a room and we've been like, oh, something feels off. That is our intuition that's speaking to us, but we've disconnected from that incredibly wise voice through all of these things that you see, the toxins in our environment, the conditioning that we've had growing up, the way our culture has evolved. So be it. Can we accept that this is where we are? What do we do from here? What are the steps that we can do from here that can support us in that unfolding? And certainly what I've seen is that in that first instance, it's so terrifying to start unwrapping that. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to find? I haven't got the capacity to feel all of this. But when we do start peeling that onion layer, we titrate our way in. The journey of the feminine. Nature moves in her cycles. Occasionally she'll do something that will be dramatic, but the world moves very in her own cycle. The slower the world goes, slower the woman go, the slower the world will go. If we can slow it all down and not necessarily need to resolve everything in this 3 weeks I've got with a counselor, or in this one experience that I'm going to have with a retreat or whatever it might be, and we can recognize how to titrate our way into our change. And then we get to what I'd say is a tipping point in that experience that you've described, which is that we peel back the onion layers and there's like, oh my gosh, I feel lighter. I feel brighter. Oh, wow. I can consciously choose to continue this journey of pulling off these layers, of taking off these cloaks that are keeping me contracted into fear. And I'm noticing now that when I pulled that layer off, there was an expansion that happened. And it was in this experience that the expansion occurred. So off came that layer. And then there's this momentum that starts building in that journey of like, oh my gosh, I want to be free. There is this call for me to be free of all of these things that are standing in the way. And we can make so many other choices. Let me get the water, let me drink pure water and stop drinking this water that's coming out the tap that's highly contaminated. Let me see if I can start buying just organic eggs and organic chicken, even if everything else, is not organic. Let me just buy those two things that are organic. Let me actually go for that walk on the beach instead of scrolling on my phone, when previously I didn't want to. I just wanted to scroll on my phone because I needed to numb out. And we start our capacity to make different choices expands. And in that, it's like, wow, then we see this effect of the speeding up. It's like slowing down in order to speed up again, but we speed up then in a completely different frequency. Very healthy way of moving forward. So, yeah.
That's that beautiful momentum of nature, because then you're in flow state. You don't have to think anymore. Your brain, then you can use it to get from point A to point B, or, make your appointments. But the heart and the soul is then leading all of this momentum that you're creating in your essence, without all, and like you said, just try one small thing. Pure water or primary water. Just research primary water. Or if you don't have access to pure water, you can pray into your water. You can structure your water with a copper wand or whatever you use, intuitively, a silver spoon. And that can change the structure of the water. They've done study after study. Look up Beta Austin or some of these people that work with water. It's extraordinary. And what's so extraordinary about it is that we are simply structured water, animated through electricity and chemicals that we will never understand. Scientists were not going to understand how the human body works. The doctors absolutely will not understand because they're so programmed by the system. But you can start to understand how your body works with what you call, intuition. That and it's commonplace. We have created this air around it that, we have ESP, or you're psychic, or you're the witchy woman. No, it's everyone has it. It's commonplace. In the northern climates, they would prepare a table for their guests to come over for dinner, not having used a phone or known that they were going to come over. They just knew they were coming over, because you get that same hit you get when someone's going to call you. Or you keep thinking about someone over and over, and they finally call you, like, hey, I've been thinking about you. It's like we have this energetic system that goes on infinitely. And those hairs that, my energetic hairs can cross with yours, and we know we're thinking about one another. Mm-hmm. And that's what you are getting into when you're more tapped into your real self, that authentic self, peeling off those crappy little onion layers that aren't you. They don't belong to you. That trauma wasn't yours. But don't hold on to it with this, this victim medallion, because then we keep ourselves small, and we're not communicating person to person, heart to heart. It's, here's my baggage combating with your baggage, and then we're still stuck in the same rut that we're in.
Yeah, totally. I'm with you. I mean, that contracted state, no good comes from that contracted state, just contraction, disease, all of those types of things. And it's like to open up into the current of the mystery of this existence. I mean, we think we've got it all worked out. It's like, oh, wow, the magic that happens when we surrender into the not knowing and this mystery of like, wow, check these meat suits we've got on. Like, oh my gosh, I was just thinking about you and you phoned me. Like, that's weird. Well, no, that's extraordinary. Like, how great is that? How to bring back almost that playfulness in this current of life. Like, how do we just become more playful? Everything's got so serious.
Yeah, or just step into wonder.
Yeah, wonder. I love that.
Just this feeling of wonder. It's wondrous how water works. It's wondrous, all these new things that we're learning, but we're not going to have the answer. That's more linear. That's more the way they have told us that this plane works, but it's not how it works. Nobody knows how it works. Nobody knows for sure what happens when you die. People have brushed against it. They've experienced some things that they can bring to the collective, but we'll never know. So there's never going to be that, hey, let's just let it go and be in the state of wonder and connection and access. So I always like to end the episode with 3 things that you can tell people they can do today to start on this path of being that unprogrammed, lit up, wild, and free human.
Yeah, no, beautiful. I mean, first and foremost, I feel that people haven't created enough intentional space for themselves, really creating. There's this difference between sacred space and mundane space. And we too often live in the mundane of the doing, of the everyday, and we fall into the cycle and so how is it that each individual that's listening can create some moment or experience for themselves of sacred space, lighting a candle at the dinner table if they didn't usually do that, or taking 15 minutes and going and standing out and putting their feet on grass, or touching a tree, or getting out into nature in some way, shape, or form. And again, it doesn't need to be overwhelming. You don't need to now go and sit and do a meditation practice for 2 hours in order to feel something different, but it's titrating something on this day, finishing listening to this podcast, for example, and instead of getting onto the phone and checking the messages that came through, etc., taking in 3 big deep breaths and just closing one's eyes and letting it settle. This is another challenge we have in our society, is we don't integrate anything. We have our phones, and even from that point of view, we sort of, check Instagram, and then it's like, oh, that was a nice quote. Follow the next one. That was a nice quote. And it's just, it doesn't settle. Yeah. Like it's like the jar gets shaken, and we don't let all the sediment just deeply embody, settle into our bodies. So, my invitation would be is to, find a little way to create sacred space for yourself, lighting a candle, going out into nature, letting things integrate into the level of being. And then, we've touched on water, which is a big passion of mine, the sacredness of water, and just, us being so unbelievably made up of water. And water, she's in our heart, she's in our bones, she is our, she's our blood, she's everything inside of ourselves. And if you can perhaps consider doing something differently with the water that you drink, or that people drink, creating, as you said earlier, if you don't have the resources or the access to, pure water, then, just merely putting your water into a jug and writing, I purify this water with everything in my heart, or as you've said, with a copper stick or something like that, just creating a relationship to water in a different way is a very beautiful journey that we can go on. And I call myself a water snob now, but it's just, I can feel the difference in the frequency of the waters when I drink them, and that's because my body is attuned to it now. It was so numbed out. I lived in London for 7 years, and I drank the tap water there when I was in my 20s and didn't even realize. Now it's like, oh my gosh, like the frequency of that is just so different. So sacred space, time in nature, and building that relationship with water would be my invitations for today.
I love that. I could see myself tonight doing all 3. I'm going to I bring a candle to the beach. We live near the water here. And so digging my toes in the sand and letting the water lap up and just feeling that connection that we have with water, the relationship we have with water, the relationship, then I can feel that sacred space with everyone around me. So, Paula, where can people find you? I will have all the links. You guys don't have to write them down, but where can people find you, and how can they work with you?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So they can find me at www.thefrequency.global. And it's the same for the Instagram handle, thefrequency.global. And on my website, people can book a free discovery call if they want to talk through anything that they've heard today that they'd like to digest a little bit further. And I can talk them through some of the programs that I run virtually online for people that are international as well as in person here in Australia. And I'm more than happy to have chats about whatever's going on for someone. If it's not something I can personally assist them with, I have a wonderful network of people around me, support people, counselors, healers, lots of practitioners who are doing lots of different extraordinary work. And if there's something in specific that they need dealt with, I can make referrals as well. So I'm more than happy to connect with anybody who would like to just talk through, even if they just want to talk through some of these concepts that we've discussed today. I'm more than happy to have that conversation.
Wonderful. Yeah, the feminine especially, I think, that's the initiation of the healing, because that we can inspire. I think that's our job as women, to kind of be the caretakers. So I love that. I'm so glad that you're doing the work that you're doing. Thank you for spending this lit up hour with me and for giving your time and your heart so eloquently.
No, beautiful, Robin, and thank you so much for your service. Wow, you've done some extraordinary things over your 35-year career, and it's wonderful that you are giving this a voice, these conversations, such a powerful voice. So I really honor the work that you've done so far, and also all the work that's still coming. May it be a joy, and may it move with grace, ease, and with consciousness and love.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Paula.